can get started while the others come in. It's lunchtime, and so they're on their break and they will filter in. So again, welcome everyone. I'm excited for you to join here today, and it's a pleasure to have you. You took the time to tune in, and for that we appreciate you. And so today we'll dive into the topic of uncontrolled network, what connects us, how we communicate, and how we work. And so with me, I have a special guest, Sir Gwilym Lewis, businessman to the core, intentional and director of Flexada. Will, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining.
Joe, and thank you very much for inviting me. And just to be clear, I'm not Sir Gwilym Lewis, I'm just Gwilym Lewis.
Gwilym Lewis. Yes.
Remember, I'm a Brit. Yeah. So
Right.
Sir has a very particular connotation. Maybe one day. But no,
Okay,
Joel, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. Yeah, we've had interesting chats in the past, like not in public. So it's good to have this kind of conversation.
Perfect. And so to set the tone here, we incorporate a lot of interconnected operations inside of our networks, in our corporate networks as well. And even working remotely and adding functional tools to help with our operations, it adds security risk and security variance to the infrastructure. And so going into that, when we refer to uncontrolled network edge, what are we implying, and why does it matter to corporate enterprise security?
That's a really, really good question. And in very, very simple terms, the uncontrolled network edge is that part of your network that your people working remotely, your people working from home are using to connect to access company systems and data. In layman's terms or layperson's terms, is based but if you're a team or an IT team, for the edge has been network perimeter. The cloud, it's where our NAS, it's where our firewalls are sitting and that sort of thing. But increasingly, that's now not as relevant as if you think about the millions of people that work remotely but still connect systems to systems and via systems that you don't control.
Right. And you covered a bit there, but just to frame that up, what he was saying, meaning the devices that sits on the perimeter of the network in which we communicate and we interact, the forefront in how we connect to inside different networks and applications. And today, it is very vital that we understand that it becomes a blurry line between the total perimeter that we perceive rather than the extended perimeters to remote networks. And so if we were supposed to ask analysts or networking team, let's say a consultant, let us see your schematics on your network, and they may include the corporate network, but it's far beyond the corporate network parameters. And so that is an awareness to bring to the table, And so right now, are we witnessing a shift in the frontier of cyber defense, one where the remote network becomes as critical to protect as the corporate environment?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is something that's now, in fact, I think it is absolutely something now that is as important as what we used to look at as the network perimeter. The NSA, GCHQ, kind of the security services of the world at the start on why the uncontrolled network edge is a threat, and in the main, it's because it's beyond an organization's control. It's very, very difficult to police when the devices are kept up to date. It's very difficult to these used to police how the devices actually connect to it. Yeah. And it presents the Mac surface that historically everyone's just said, we're running endpoint detection. We've got firewalls on our, on our corporate devices. Something that is increased back is the attack. It's become like the soft underbelly of corporate networks. And so it's important now that it actually becomes part of people's risk register. It becomes something that they look at.
Indeed. And even in the threat perspective, in terms of a threat hunting or threat awareness or intelligence, we're seeing a shift in the approach of our adversaries, where they now focus on different aspects of reach that everyone is available to now, your browser, security, IoT devices. They are aware, and it's working, that the security awareness training and user education, I must commend for the employees who receive user education and awareness training. They're getting smarter, and they're getting aware of the behaviors that they should pinpoint in, let's say, phishing emails. And so adversaries picks up on these behaviors. And so their shift for browser security vulnerabilities and how we interact with web pages. And maybe if you're scrolling and you see that sponsored web search, to be careful on what you're clicking, because these are, ads or things that they can propagate up there for you to easily access to and then lead to a compromise. And so it's vital to have that control, because that compromise can easily leak into the corporate environment.
Very much so. And I think to add to that is one of the big changes is, and it's interesting you talking about kind of the increased number of attacks that are happening, is historically uncontrolled network edge devices were really kind of the food chain for threat actors, because it was kind of, it was possible that you could attack them. They were definitely known ways to do them, and we can talk about this shortly as well. But there were higher value targets, and so people didn't worry about uncontrolled devices, so home routers, for instance. Where that's changed, and increasingly so, is the number of threat actors that exist has just grown exponentially. We know this within the industry. There are more people attacking more things. Yeah? So that's just the scale of the problem has become greater. But also, as people have realised that there's different parts of the value chain they can attack, now things that didn't used to get attacked are very much in the kind of the crosshairs of threat actors. And so you have this interesting combination where there are more people attacking more things, and router security in particular, and these are routers in people's homes, these are routers potentially in hotels, in serviced offices, in co-working spaces where somebody else runs the IT, basically. Yeah.
Right.
People know that they are weak and they're vulnerable, and so they are taking advantage of them. And yes, to your point about security awareness, there is so far that you can do, and you can train and you can enforce these kind of security rules and upskill people within an organization. But if you then have someone connected to the same router that hasn't gone through that training, doesn't matter how good your training is, the person next door to them, because they are a family friend, if they're working at home, they're in an Airbnb and it happens to be someone that's staying in the same apartment complex and they're all connected to the same router, have really, really bad security. Most of them yourself. The software is not updated regularly. Even if you patch all the time, the underlying firmware, I don't quite believe the statistic I'm about to give you, but it's been published several times. Underlying firmware, on average, 83 known vulnerabilities in any particular router. Because people don't update, when they do update their firmware, they don't update the kernel that sits underneath it. And so you definitely have, pretty much every router has at least one critical CVE, if not lots.
Indeed, and it's not a common practice to log in with your router gateway and log in remotely or upgrade your firmware to your router. Once it's out the shop, you use it and you connect to the internet. And so it is a concern when you refer to family, friends, or colleagues, especially families. You are on the same network. It's a flat network. And so we now have to consider, even though it's our home, the structure of our network. Do we have segmentation in our workspaces against our network where our families and our children enjoy their entertainment, right? So that is a concern towards it. And so when it comes to best practices, and so professionals interact with their corporate systems remotely, what are the key best practices and security practices that we can implement to minimize these risks? I mean, there's so much, but there's got to be some that we can do.
I mean, yes, there definitely are, and I'm smiling because yeah, there's an education piece. Yeah, I mean, do make sure that your home network is secured as best you can. So move away from default passwords that these come with standard devices. That is changing gradually, but there's still a lot where the password is admin and the username is admin. Do tell people that it's important for them to ensure that the firmware on their devices are updated. So again, standard stuff. The problem with this, and this is why I smile, is they're very difficult to enforce and they're very difficult to monitor because
Right.
if you're a small IT team with a small number of staff, you can be saying like, "Hey Joel, have you remembered to upgrade your software on your router?" If
Right.
you're an organisation that's got hundreds of people or thousands of people, it's never going to happen. So I think from kind of what you then need to be looking at is making sure, to your point, people are educated and have a huge degree of cyber awareness so that they keep their devices secure themselves, but also potentially understand that they shouldn't be sharing their Wi-Fi password with their neighbours. That their kids should probably have some kind of endpoint security. And then at an organizational level is looking and saying, okay, what can we do to mitigate as far as we can, potential threats, if they come from a remote network. So zero trust, absolutely implement zero trust.
Right.
If you're not already, and you don't want to do zero trust, at least implement least privilege. Look at the resources that people have access to, ensure that they can only connect to them through a VPN potentially, that you are providing users with VPNs. And you'd be surprised how many organizations don't, because they work on the basis that they think the cloud platform they're using is secure, so why bother using a VPN? And the kind of standard stuff, patch management on your devices. If you have mobile device management policies, locking the device down as far as possible, so that you're your bottle that's running. So you can do quite a lot as an organization. It just takes time to police is the problem.
It does. And I believe it requires some interaction or standardization in terms of when the devices are manufactured. You call it security by design or security in the design. There's a lot of communication protocols that we implement into the devices that we use, rather on edge, smart home hub devices that we can connect anywhere around the world to control devices in our home. And so these operate in different communication protocols, but without security by design, and I believe it is important that we recognize this now because of the capabilities of the adversaries. They're growing in skill. They're growing in the design, and their procedures are changing a bit and adding more techniques to the infiltration of our networks. And so if manufacturers or operations will really work together, or regulations, to make sure that there's some security so that when the consumers receive it, there's not much of a pressure on them, since it will require a learning curve for them to implement any security control.
I think that's very true, and I think one of the things to be, I think to consider with security by design is that can also be and should also be a part of the processes that one puts in place for DR, for general connectivity, for access, even for kind of general user access, because there are different levels. If you think of the layers of security that exist, for anything that we do through an organization, and so manufacturers of devices that we are not buying as organizations have no real need to build better security in, because they just need to sell boxes. It will happen over time, and this is definitely what the NSA were talking about GCHQ earlier this year. It's like, there was a check, really simple things like don't install a default password. But what we can also do with security by design is say, okay, how do we design our access policy so that it is as secure as possible? And within that, let's assume that the endpoint, the uncontrolled network edge device, is potentially insecure. So, what's the way that we fix that? And so the security by design methodology then we build into everything we do. So rather than being driven by what's the quickest, most expedient way to do things, it's like sitting down with, as security professionals, with the operational people, with HR, and saying, all right, we need to achieve this. How do we do this in a way that is going to be as frictionless as possible for the user, but give us the greatest level of security?
Indeed, indeed. And you're saying that with the friction in terms of our operation, with our core values to uphold the confidentiality, availability, and the integrity of the data and systems, I say we are also on a scale where we have convenience and security. And I often hear that the more convenience you have, the less security. The more security, the less convenience. And so really to find a balance in between, to have as much security to keep the availability of the systems and integrity of data, but convenience for user or human element to enjoy and still use the devices that they do to connect and work and communicate.
Yeah, and I think I'm smiling because I've been doing this for a long time, and so there is a challenge, I think, that we have as security professionals, which is that we're often seen as my wife would describe us, the fun police. Yeah, and I mean that not me personally, but just us as an organisation, or us as people. And I think, and so there's one that's definitely there's a physical trade-off. Like you're absolutely right. If you want to be really secure, it's going to be painful, and vice versa. But with that, to your point about cybersecurity awareness, there's an educational piece that comes with this, because people don't want to do things badly. It's not really human nature. Yeah. However, the way that we explain to people why something is necessary, the context that we give them, can have a huge impact on how much friction adding security processes into a system take. So if you mandate that everyone needs to use a password manager, because that's what's got to happen, people aren't going to be very, very keen about it, and then it will get adopted. But if you say to people, as an example, hey, look, so we need to use password managers, it's going to be a bit of a pain to do. But here's the really, really good thing. If you start using a password manager, that website that you only log on to like every Valentine's Day to buy your partner some flowers, and you can never remember the password, use a password manager, and it's going to be saved in the password manager. You set it up securely once, and then you never have to worry it again. And so over time, this is going to make your life easier. People would be like, okay, that makes sense. And that's true for all pieces of security. So yes, the more secure you are, the more friction there's going to be, but people will deal with a surprising amount of friction if they understand why they've got to. And also, and this is the most important thing for me anyways, making sure that the amount of security that's in place is commensurate to the risk you face as an organization.
That's right.
Not everyone needs to have the same level.
Indeed. And so when we talk about the threats and how we enforce security, and unfortunately, there are going to be compromises. We're seeing it, the scale is increasing today. And so it comes to the question, and I believe this would bank on our CISOs and our chiefs to really ponder on this thought. When there is a compromise, or should organizations redefine their incident response playbook, where threats originate from remote or home networks or personal IoT devices. So these are even IoT devices, they sit on the edge. And so this touches the boundary on privacy and concerns and legalities concerns. So, CISOs and chiefs do have a work cut out for them.
They absolutely do, and I think it's interesting. How do you kind of redo your incident playbook? And one of the things that doesn't directly address what you've just said, but we will come to, that was publicised today in the UK was the NCSC, which is the National Cybersecurity Centre, basically the government organisation, the friendly government organisation for better cybersecurity and commercially in the UK. Have issued guidance that says that one of the most important things for any DR plan is to have it physically printed out. Yeah, because there is a reliance upon systems which becomes problematic if you lose your systems and everything's on your system. So there was a very famous hack a number of years ago where Maersk, who were a big shipping company, got hacked, and they lost. Not only did they lose lots of company data, there's a story about how they actually got it back with a server that happened to be offline, blah, blah, blah. But what they also lost was their phone books, and they lost their WhatsApp chat groups, and they effectively lost the ability to communicate with each other because they could still pick up the phone and phone different people, but they didn't have their phone numbers anymore. Where this fits into what do you do for your DR playbook for your incident response for people working from home, one needs to have a plan for, okay, we have a lot of remote workers that now potentially have a lot of company data on their systems that are now disconnected. So how do we deal with that? Both from, to your point, a privacy point of view. Do we now we need to stop people randomly uploading stuff onto their personal Dropbox because that's how they try and communicate. So there's a point around that. But also from a data integrity point of view, because quite potentially you've got a lot of distributed data that if you've lost the core, you still have access to at some point, and it's making sure that that doesn't get corrupted. And then most importantly is making sure that you know how to contact all those people that are accessing systems from home. So, that your IAM systems are up to date, so that you know where the people are and that you've got a separate copy, and it could still be electronic, but that is ring-fenced and ideally printed out, so you can say, okay, we've had an incident, someone is now in charge of literally phoning each person and saying, turn your laptop off, do not connect to the internet anymore because blah, blah, blah. Tracing incidents that come from home devices, which is your starting point for this, that becomes a lot more difficult, I think. And I don't think we're at a place where without a lot of expense, that's easy to do. Because really you need you need reporting on and logging on whatever the uncontrolled network edge device is. And even we don't do that as a company that provides controlled, uncontrolled network edge devices.
Indeed. And even going back to the practices, when it comes to users and they're doing operations on their personal devices, one best practice that we all can implement is creating a separate profile or using a different environment from your personal search, browsing, or cookie sessions. That way you keep the work communication or work environment separate from your personal. Even today, when we see an increase in session cookie hijacking with attacker in the middle. And so if you have access to your work and your personal, and they're all in one environment, and you're connecting to public interfaces, if you have not logged out of your Microsoft session yesterday from Friday and today's Saturday, then you might have a problem where the token is hijacked and they can now bypass even MFA,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that presents that kind of perennial problem, and back to friction, then more secure, fun police. Which way do you which way do you want to go? I think and we're as a profession, we're always going to struggle with how do you enable people still to live their personal lives at the same time online as they're doing their work stuff.
Indeed. All right. So I see someone in the chat. Please talk more about VPN. So we use VPN, especially when we're working in the instance of remote working, to connect to our corporate environment or where your organization network is held. Basically, we are keeping that traffic secured, the data that you're transmitting, any files you're transmitting, if you're accessing any remote servers in that environment, because it's at risk to TLS interception or attacker in the middle. And so that's really keeping, let's say, a funnel over that traffic into the corporate network, so all that data is secured. And so it's best approach to begin with when you're doing a remote working, to have a VPN, a suitable, capable, functioning, and well-known VPN to protect your traffic. Absolutely. All right, so we're winding down now to the end, and it's very vital that we become aware of all this concern of the variance it adds, and our strength on the security posture now relies on our habits. The human element is now so integrated into our corporate enterprise level, and so for remote working, it gives us freedom, but now it asks for us to turn freedom into discipline. So it is a long workaround, but we are getting there. The awareness is spreading. And of course, with the increase of artificial intelligence functions and what it can do as different module increase, the awareness needs to be there. And I think we're getting there, but everything takes time.
Absolutely. And I think everything does take time, and the key thing to remember is like that the amount of time that we've got is shrinking. So if I would leave a passing like ending thought for the audience, it's that one shouldn't be overly stressed about doing security properly. However, one should spend time figuring out exactly what risks you face and therefore have a plan to address them, or don't have a plan but at least understand them.
Indeed. Pleasure. Or do we have any Q&A? If you guys have any question, feel free to ask and we'll answer that for you. In the meantime, we do appreciate you guys for joining today. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the engagement. I enjoyed the interaction. You guys can feel free to question even after the webinar. Then the email will be sent out and you can reply to that email. And if there's any question, even for Gwilym, I can pass it on and we can work together on that. Again, it's such a pleasure to have you, Gwilym. And I look forward to see what the future holds, especially for you and your company. And I hope everyone enjoy your day and take care.
Thanks very much, Joel. It's been a pleasure. Speak soon.